Vapo and Cramb presents as a simple children's book, but beneath the cartoonish illustrations lies a 20-scene philosophical meta-narrative. A meta-narrative is a story that explicitly acknowledges its own artificiality, often reflecting on the act of storytelling itself. The text begins with two imaginary entities. They are abruptly resurrected in an empty void by the aging mind of their original human creator, an artist named Slip. We can look directly at the source material to identify our subjects. This cover introduces the two protagonists, the massive eye representing Vapo, and the small clam-like creature named Cramb. The story operates as a retrograde creation myth. Unlike a traditional deity who provides immediate purpose, Slip gives his creations consciousness, but leaves them with no instructions. They are burdened with defining their own reason for existing. This specific framing shifts the text from a standard story into an epistemological crisis. Epistemology is the philosophical study of knowledge and how we validate what is true. By stripping away any divine mandate, the characters are forced to deduce their own utility from nothing. The two protagonists approach this crisis in opposite ways. Vapo is a vast, dialogue-heavy intellectual gas cloud, and Cramb is a tiny, kinetic clam. Academic analysis often falls for the assumption that the most articulate character is the author's primary representative. It is easy to mistake Vapo's complex philosophical paragraphs for the intended anchor of the narrative. However, the structural mechanics of the text suggest that Vapo's entire philosophy is a failure. His intellectualizing does not solve their existential problem, it actively worsens it. Instead, Cramb, the character who spends the narrative performing absurd, seemingly meaningless physical actions, serves as the true philosophical center of the text. To correctly read this postmodern work, we must look past the loudest voice in the void. We have to analyze how the text behaves, rather than just what the characters say. Vapo's central argument spans multiple scenes. He asserts that the five feeble senses and human language are broken tools, insufficient for understanding the true scope of cosmic reality. We see the trap Vapo builds for himself in the visual representation of his character. There is a deep structural irony at play here. Vapo spends 10 full scenes using the exact tool he claims is broken, the English language, to explain exactly why it is broken. The author's stage directions reinforce this failure of the intellect. Throughout his philosophical monologues, the text limits Vapo's physical presence, describing him as motionless, drifting, or trapped in stillness. The text explicitly contrasts this linguistic obsession with the concept of gassiness. In the narrative's vocabulary, gassiness refers to over-intellectualized, paralyzed human thought. It takes up immense space but accomplishes nothing. Vapo's over-reliance on language results in complete existential paralysis. His intellect creates a linguistic boundary that isolates him from the reality he tries to describe. Cramb's response to the empty void prioritizes physical action over semantic meaning. Early in the story, Cramb begins performing the Crambnik dance. This is an absurd, repetitive physical movement he executes inside Vapo's cloud. The specific mechanical actions of this dance are crude. He clacks his eye stalks together, sucks in Vapo's gases, and squeezes his half-shells together to rocket himself forward in a tight circle. It is a display of non-intellectual physicality. This movement aligns with the theater of the absurd, and specifically the work of playwright Samuel Beckett. The theater of the absurd is a movement where plays focus on the meaninglessness of human existence, often featuring characters validating their own lives through repetitive physical tasks in an empty space. We can contrast Cramb's kinetic momentum directly against Vapo's static dialogue loops. While Vapo dictates paragraphs about the limits of reality, Cramb's physical exertion drives the narrative forward. Cramb's kinetic propulsion creates the only tangible momentum in the text. In an empty void, physical presence and action hold more weight than paralyzed philosophy. Cramb provides a reason for performing his dance. He states that the violent expulsion of gas helps him distribute what he calls his pirate signal into the surrounding void. This conceptual diagram illustrates the difference between his intent and standard communication theory. On the left, a signal is a decipherable message containing organized information. Noise, shown on the right, is raw transmission without syntax, meaningless static. Yet in Scene 5, Cramb states that his broadcast contains no message, just noise. He is intentionally generating the static that communicators try to filter out. This action challenges standard communication theory. By insisting on broadcasting pure noise, Cramb proves that a transmission does not require a receiver or even a decipherable language to be valid. The act of broadcasting is enough. We see this grounded in the historical parallel Cramb names himself after, the Soviet satellite Sputnik. Sputnik didn't transmit complex data. It merely emitted a continuous, repetitive radio pulse to prove it was there. It was a blind, continuous beacon. Cramb validates creation and expression as intrinsically meaningful acts. They hold weight independent of whether anyone is listening or capable of understanding the output. We can look to the paratext of the book, specifically the appendix provided by the author. Paratext refers to the materials surrounding the main body of a published work, like forewords or appendices, which frame how the text is received. In this section, the author offers a self-diagnosis of his own work. He admits that Vapo talks too much and says too little. He acknowledges that Vapo is essentially a lecture wrapped in a nebula. The author breaks down the core architecture of the story, confirming that the entire narrative tension is designed around a conflict between doing, represented by the body, and understanding, represented by the mind. We can call Cramb's approach kinetic existentialism. By refusing to engage with Vapo's complex thesis about interconnectedness, Cramb achieves a deliberate epistemological victory. He doesn't need to understand the void to exist within it. The text's own architecture admits its intellectual center as a failure. It validates Cramb's absurd physical action as a response to an empty universe. This brings us to the ultimate question the narrative poses. Does creating something actually matter if nobody ever sees it? Look at Vapo's final resolution. He exhibits an intellectual need for their broadcasts to be part of a grand, interconnected cosmic conversation. He needs the noise to mean something to someone else. Contrast that with Cramb's final line. Yeah, maybe they will. He operates on faith, functioning without a complex theological architecture. If we strip away the character dialogue, we are left only with the physical reality of their setting, the immense isolation and scale of the void itself. Faith, in this context, is not a religious construct. It is the raw, kinetic assumption that the void isn't entirely empty. It is the decision to act as if someone is there. Vapo and Cramb defines existence as the defiant act of broadcasting a signal into the static. The ultimate pedagogical takeaway here is one of method. Rigorous literary analysis requires examining how a text is built, not just agreeing with whatever its loudest characters happen to say. This reveals a paradox. The text is written entirely in English dialogue, yet it succeeds by illustrating that language is useless. From this analysis, we extract two core rules. The first, action precedes audience. The act of creation is justified by the effort, not the reception. The second rule, faith precedes theology. You do not need a complete system of understanding to justify your own existence. In a narrative obsessed with the limits of human language, the character who chooses to spin in circles and make noise is the only one telling the truth.